Hey, deserving listeners, it's just me today. I thought I would respond to a patron email, very interesting email that I would like to share with you here. But first, let me introduce the podcast. This is called the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. This email is from patron Ruben. Ruben writes, "What are the 20 most important episodes in your life that made you the person you are now, where you learned a key lesson?" So this is an interesting question. Ruben, I think, sent me this email several months ago, and I put it in my archive thinking that I probably would never answer this question. It's rather personal, and I don't know if I had a good formulation of an answer anyway. But I gave it some thought and decided to make an episode about it. And, to come up with the 20 most important episodes of my life, it seemed like an interesting exercise because, one, what is an important episode of my life or anyone's life, really? To think of life that way, as if we have episodes or moments that are pivotal. I think that's the way that biographers think, journalists think, people who make biopics, they think this way. But I don't think that way about my life. I don't think like, well, there was that moment where everything turned, or maybe my life just doesn't have moments like that or something. I don't know. So it seemed like to come up with 20 would be so hard. Or even just come up with one. And then thinking like, well, geez, that's pretty personal, even if I did come up with one, right? So I gave it some thought, and I decided to make an episode about it. This episode is just for patrons of the podcast, though, mostly because of the personal nature, and I would rather not have this just, published to the general public. I'd like to just share this with my, patrons of the podcast. So if you're listening to this and you're not a patron of the podcast yet, this episode will end before the content begins. If you want to hear the full episode, you have to go to patreon.com and become a patron. That's patreon.com. When you become a patron of the podcast, you have access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. Let me just read the various different exclusive episodes that we have here. We have narcissistic personality disorder, rape fantasy reasons, 20 tips for a good life, contextual family therapy, OCD, social justice and training programs, cultural bound syndromes, dangerous clients, coaching versus counseling, self-disclosure, time management tips, mental illness and gender, clients who are racist, common confidentiality mistakes, emotion-focused therapy, psychodynamic therapy, revoking a therapist's license, hypochondria, suing a counselor, repressed memories, borderline versus complex PTSD, psychotherapy notes versus progress notes, therapist competence, Donald Winnicott. We have a Black Mirror episode that's only for patrons. Passive-aggressive personality disorder, choosing the right grad school, gaslighting, narrative therapy, parapsychology, ethics, abuse by science, dark triad, ADHD. It just, there's so many. People would argue, and I would argue that our best episodes are just for patrons of the podcast. So go to patreon.com, become a patron of the podcast. Do so now. Also, if you are a patron and you want to go back and listen to those episodes, an easy way to find them is to go to our website and to log in with your password. Okay, so let's go on to the patron zone.